The stagecoach lurched to a stop, wheels grinding against the frozen mud of Redstone, Montana. As Clara Emmett clutched the bundle in her arms, a swaddled infant, barely 3 months old, her breath a soft puff against Clara's neck. The winter wind sliced through the gaps in her threadbare shawl, stinging the bruise blooming purple beneath her left eye. She stepped down, boots crunching into snow-dusted earth, her single valise thumping beside her. The town stretched before her, a jagged line of clapboard buildings, under a sky heavy with the promise of more snow. Clara's gaze darted to the boarding house across the street, its sign creaking, rooms for respectable ladies. Her letter to Mrs. Hawthorne, penned in desperation from a Denver boarding house, had promised a fresh start. A cousin's friend, Mrs. Hawthorne, had written back, offering a room and vague assurances of work. Clara had clung to those words like a lifeline, her fingers tracing them nightly as her baby, Lily, slept against her chest. But as Clara approached, the boarding house door swung open, and Mrs. Hawthorne stood there, arms crossed, her mouth a thin line. "You're Clara Emmett." Her eyes flicked to the bruise, then to Lily, then to Clara's plain dress, patched at the hem. "Didn't know you'd be in such a state." Clara's throat tightened. "I wrote you, ma'am, about the room. I can pay no room for trouble." Mrs. Hawthorne cut in, voice sharp as the wind. "Folks here talk. A woman like you and wed, bruised, with a child. They'll think I'm running a house of ill repute." Clara stood frozen, the rejection landing like a fist. "I'm no trouble," she whispered, but the door was already closing, the latch clicking shut. Behind her, the stagecoach driver coughed, muttering something about her kind. Passers-by on the boardwalk glanced her waymen with narrowed eyes, women with pursed lips. The cold bit deeper, seeping into her bones, as Lily stirred, a soft whimper breaking the silence. Clara pulled her shawl tighter, her jaw set. She'd come to Redstone to escape whispers, not to drown in them. Picking up her valise, she turned toward the town's heart, her boots leaving shallow prints in the snow, each step a quiet vow to survive. Clara trudged through Redstone's frozen streets, the weight of her valise pulling at her shoulder, Lily's warmth the only softness in a world gone sharp. The wind howled, flinging snowflakes against her bruised cheek, each sting a reminder of the boarding house door slamming shut. Her eyes, red-rimmed from sleepless nights, scanned the town for shelter. The saloon's laughter spilled into the dusk, but its warmth wasn't for her. The church steeple loomed, silent and judgmental, at the edge of town. She found the livery stable, its weathered planks sagging under fresh snow. The stableman, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, eyed her warily. "Ain't no hotel," he grunted, but her quiet plea just one night, for the child and a few coins, softened his scowl. He pointed to a corner store, straw-strewn and smelling of horses. "Stay out of trouble," he said, turning away. Clara sank into the straw, her back against a rough beam. Lily cradled close. The stable's dim lantern cast shadows, flickering like the doubts in her chest. She'd fled Denver's whispers, woman ruined unfittingly to find Redstone's cold indifference. Her fingers brushed the bruise under her eye, a fading mark from a man who'd promised love and delivered fists. She'd vowed never again. Boarding that stagecoach with nothing but Lily and a stubborn spark of hope. Now that spark flickered. The stable's chill seeped through her shawl, and Lily's soft coos turned to hungry cries. Clara hushed her, unbuttoning her dress to nurse, the act grounding her in purpose. She hummed a half-forgotten lullaby, her voice barely above the wind rattling the stable walls. The straw pricked her skin, but she straightened, refusing to let her dignity crumble. In her valise, she found a crust of bread, saved from the journey. She chewed slowly, tasting dust and resolve. Tomorrow, she'd find any work to keep them fed. The town might scorn her, but she'd carve a place here, not for their pity, but for her and Lily's survival. As the lantern dimmed, Clara wrapped her shawl around them both, her breath steadying. The world outside could wait. Tonight, she'd hold her daughter and endure. Clara woke to the creak of the stable door and the scent of damp hay. Lily's small warmth curled against her chest. Dawn light filtered through the slats, gray and thin, like her hopes. She rose, brushing straw from her skirt, her fingers stiff from the cold. The bruise under her eye ached less today, but the town's judgment lingered, heavy as the snow piling. Outside, she tied her shawl, kissed Lily's forehead, and stepped into Redstone to find a way forward. By noon, she'd knocked on every door that might open to a woman like her. The seamstress shook her head, citing no need for extra hands. The bakery wanted someone with a cleaner look. Each rejection landed softly, like snow settling, but Clara kept her chin high, her voice steady. At the general store, the clerk paused, eyeing her mended dress. "Can you sew?" he asked. She nodded, showing him the neat stitches on her valise's torn strap. He offered piecework mending minus shirts for a few cents each. "Don't expect charity," he added. She didn't. She found a room above the feed store, a cramped attic with a slanted roof and a single window, rented for $1 a week. The landlady, Mrs. Cutler, frowned at Lily but took the coins without comment. Clara set up her corner, a pallet for Lily, a crate for a table, her needle and thread laid out like tools of war. By lamplight, she sewed, her fingers deft despite the chill. each stitch a defiance of the whispers drifting up from the street below and wed. Trouble, no good. Townsfolk passed her on the boardwalk, their glances sharp, their murmurs cutting. Came with a black eye, one woman hissed. Bringing shame here, said another. Clara walked on, her boots crunching snow, her gaze fixed ahead. At the store, she delivered mended shirts, pocketing coins that clinked with possibility. She bought flour, a tin of milk for Lily, and a scrap of blue calico to patch her own dress. Each night, she rocked Lily, humming softly, the attic's walls creaking like they held secrets. She was building something small, fragile, but hers. The town could judge, but Clara would not break. She threaded her needle, the rhythm steady, stitching a life from scraps. Clara's days settled into a rhythm of survival, her needle flashing through coarse fabric under the attic's flickering lamp. The general store became her anchor, its bell jingling each time she delivered mended shirts. Behind the counter stood Elias Ward, a rancher-turned-storekeeper, his broad hand sorting nails and sugar sacks with quiet precision. He was older, perhaps 35, with crow's feet etched around hazel eyes that seemed to see more than they let on. He never pried, never lingered on her bruise, now a faint shadow or Lily's soft cries from the sling at her side. One raw February morning, Clara pushed through the store's door, snow dusting her shawl, a bundle of repaired shirts under her arm. The air smelled of coffee beans and leather. Elias looked up from his ledger, his gaze steady, not cold like the others. Neat work, he said, inspecting her stitches, tighter than most. His voice was low, like gravel smoothed by a river, and Clara felt a flicker of warmth, unfamiliar, unguarded. She nodded, setting Lily's sling on a crate, the baby's coos mingling with the crackle of the potbelly stove. Need more thread, she said, her words clipped, cautious. Elias slid a spool of black across the counter, then paused. Got some denim scraps out back, he offered, good for patching. No charge. Clara's instinct was to refuse. Charity stung worse than scorn, but his eyes held no pity, only a quiet knowing, as if he saw the weight she carried and respected her for it. She took the scraps, her fingers brushing the rough fabric, and murmured thanks. As she turned to leave, Elias spoke again. You walk far to get here. Snow's deep today. I can hitch the wagon, drop you closer. Clara froze, her breath catching. The offer was simple, practical, but it felt like a hand extended across a chasm. I manage, she said, softer than she meant. He nodded, no push, no judgment, just a faint smile that lingered as she stepped back into the cold. Outside, the wind bit her cheeks, but the denim scraps in her valise felt like a promise. Elias hadn't asked about her past, hadn't flinched. At Lily, for the first time in Redstone, Clara felt seen not as a scandal, but as herself. Clara's visits to the general store grew frequent, each trip a quiet stitch in the fabric of her days. The snow softened into March slush, and Redstone's streets churned with mud, clinging to her boots as she carried mended shirts and Lily's sling. Elias was always there, behind the counter, his hand steady as he weighed flour or counted coins. Their exchanges were brief. Thread for shirts, a nod for thanks, but a thread of understanding began to weave between them, unspoken yet palpable. One afternoon, Clara arrived to find Elias sweeping the store's porch, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, a faint sheen of sweat on his brow despite the chill. Lily babbled, tugging at Clara's shawl, and Elias glanced over, his eyes softening. She's got spirit, he said, leaning on the broom. Clara's lips twitched, almost a smile. More than me some days, she replied, her voice low, testing the air. He chuckled, a sound like distant thunder, warm and unforced. He began saving things for hers, more practical gifts disguised as afterthoughts, a tin of tea when she mentioned sleepless nights, a scrap of wool for Lily's blanket, left over from a shipment. Clara accepted them with a guarded nod, her pride wrestling with gratitude. She noticed how he spoke to her, not about her past, not about the whispers that followed her through town, but about the present, the thaw coming, the quality of her stitches, the way Lily's eyes tracked the store's lantern light. One evening, as dusk painted the sky violet, Clara lingered after handing over her work. Elias was restocking shelves, his movements deliberate, and she found herself watching the way his hands handled each item with care. You ever miss ranching? She asked, surprising herself. He paused, a sack of beans in hand, and looked at her, not with pity, but with a quiet weight. Some days, he said, but this suits me as simpler, lets me see folks for who they are. His gaze held hers, steady, and Clara felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with something softer, riskier. She left with a spool of thread and a warmth she couldn't name, the mud sucking at her boots less heavy than before. Elias saw her strength, her silences, and in those moments, Clara felt the first stirrings of a bond, fragile as spring ice, but growing. April's thaw turned Redstone streets to a mire of mud and promise, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth and budding sage. Clara's attic room, once a refuge of necessity, now held traces of home. A quilt pieced from Elias's denim scraps draped over Lily's pallet, its uneven stitches a map of her late-night resolve. Her days were a rhythm of survival, sewing by lamplight, nursing Lily, delivering mended shirts to the general store. But Elias's quiet kindness had begun to soften the edges of her solitude. One morning, Clara found herself kneading dough. On her crate table, a rare indulgence bought with a week's extra earnings. She shaped a small tart, its crust imperfect but fragrant with the last of her sugar and a pinch of wild mint she'd gathered near the creek. It was for a grand gesture, but a risk, her heart trembling as she wrapped it in a clean cloth. She'd never given anything before, not like this. Not when every coin and crumb was a fight to keep Dot at the store. The bell jingled as she entered, Lily asleep in her sling. Elias was behind the counter, tallying a ledger, his brow furrowed. "Until he saw her more shirts?" he asked, but his eyes caught the cloth bundle in her hands. Clara's throat tightened, her fingers clutching the tart like a secret. "For you," she said, voice barely above a whisper, setting it on the counter. "It's just a tart, mint and sugar." Her cheeks warmed, and she looked away, bracing for dismissal. Elias unwrapped the cloth, his calloused fingers careful, as if handling something fragile. The tart sat small and golden, its edges uneven but earnest. He didn't speak at first, just looked at it, then at her, his hazel eyes steady with something deeper than gratitude. "Smells like spring," he said finally, his voice low, warm. "Thank you, Clara." He broke off a piece, tasted it, and nodded, a slow smile spreading. "Better than I deserve." She ducked her head, the weight of his gaze both heavy and light. As she left, the tart's mint lingered in the air, a quiet bridge between them. Clara felt the risk of her gesture settle into something new, not trust, not yet, but a hope that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than her scars. May's sun warmed Redstone's dusty streets, coaxing wildflowers from the earthen drawing. Townsfolk to the spring market stalls lined the square, heavy with the scent of fresh bread, smoked meat, and blooming lilacs. Clara hesitated at the edge of the crowd, Lily in her sling, her patched dress smoothed as best she could. She'd come to buy thread and sell a few mended shirts, her coins knotted in a scrap of calico. The whispers still followed her onward. Bruised trouble, but her spine stayed straight. Her gaze steady. Elias's stall stood near the center, piled with sacks of flour and jars of molasses. He spotted her through the throng, his hazel eyes catching the light, and raised a hand in quiet greeting. Clara's heart stuttered, but she nodded back, weaving through the crowd. She reached his stall, setting her shirts down, and he handed her a spool of thread without a word about payment. "Stay a bit," he said, voice low, like a shared secret. "Market's lively today." She lingered, something new stirring in her chest. Elias moved easily among the townsfolk, his laugh warm but never loud, his hand steady as he measured goods. When a miner's wife, her lips pursed, muttered about that woman near his stall, Elias's gaze didn't waver. He stepped closer to Clara, offering Lily a carved wooden rattle from his pocket. "Made it for my niece once," he said, loud enough for the woman to hear. "Reckon Lily might like it." The wife's mouth snapped shut, and Clara's fingers brushed his as she took the rattle, her throat tight with gratitude. The crowd's hum grew as a fiddler struck up a tune, couples gathering to dance in the square. Elias leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "Care to walk with me?" he asked. Clara hesitated, feeling eyes on her, but his steady presence anchored her. They moved through the market together, Lily cooing, the rattle clutched in her tiny fist. Whispers trailed them, but Elias's shoulder brushed hers, a silent vow, and Clara held her head higher. Her steps lighter dot as they paused by a lilac stall, the flowers' sweetness mingling with dust. Clara realized she wasn't invisible anymore. With Elias beside her, she felt seen not as a scandal, but as a woman reclaiming her place. One quiet step at a time. June's twilight draped Redstone in soft indigo, the air thick with the scent of sage and cooling earth. Clara sat on the attic's single chair, her needle idle for once, Lily asleep on the quilted pallet. The window was open, letting in the hum of crickets and a breeze that stirred the calico curtain she'd sewn from Elias's scraps. Her thoughts drifted to him, his steady hands, his quiet smile, the way he'd stood by her at the market, unflinching under the town's gaze. Her heart ached with a longing she hadn't dared name. A soft knock at the attic door startled her. Elias stood there, hat in hand, his silhouette framed by the fading light. "Didn't mean to intrude," he said, his voice low, like the creak of weathered wood. "Saw your lamp, thought you might need company." Clara's breath caught, but she nodded, gesturing to the crate beside her. He sat, his presence filling the small space. Warm and solid. They spoke of small things at first, the store, the early harvest, Lily's new habit of grabbing at spoons. But the air grew heavy with unspoken words. Elias's hands rested on his knees, fingers tracing the edge of his hat, and Clara felt the weight of his gaze, not pressing, but waiting. "Clara," he said finally, his voice softer than the breeze, "you've built something here, not just for Lily, but for you. I see it, the way you don't bend no matter what they say." Her eyes stung, the bruise long faded but its memory, sharp. "I had to," she whispered, "didn't have a choice." Elias leaned forward, his hazel eyes catching the lamplight. You had a choice to break. You didn't. That's what I see. A woman stronger than this town knows. His words landed like stones in still water, rippling through her. She looked away, her fingers twisting the calico curtain. You don't know what I was before. He reached out, his hand hovering, then settling gently over hers. I know who you are now, he said, and that's enough. The silence stretched, heavy with truth, until he drew her close, his lips brushing her forehead. A promise more intimate than any kiss. Clara exhaled, her heart thawing, the weight of her past lighter in his arms. July's warmth settled over Redstone, the air humming with the scent of sun-baked grass and wild roses climbing the hills. Clara's attic room, once a stark refuge, now held traces of a life-taking root, a small herb garden in tin cans on the windowsill, a new quilt half-stitched on her cray table, its patches bright with hope. Elias's presence had become a constant, not loud or demanding, but steady, like the creek that ran through town. Their evenings together sharing coffee, mending by lamplight, or watching Lily toddle across the floor felt like a promise unfolding. One afternoon, Elias arrived with a coil of rope and a quiet purpose. Got a fence needs fixing out at my old place, he said, his eyes meeting hers. Thought you and Lily might come. Air's good out there. Clara hesitated, the weight of leaving town scrutiny unfamiliar. But his hand brushing hers, calloused and sure, eased her doubts. She packed a basket bread, a jar of preserves, a blanket for Lily, and they rode out in his wagon. The creak of wheels a soft rhythm against the prairie's hush. The ranch was modest. A low cabin nestled against a rise of cottonwoods, its fence sagging but proud. They worked side by side, Elias hammering posts while Clara tied knots, her fingers deft from years of needlework. Lily giggled, chasing a butterfly through the grass. As the sun dipped, painting the sky gold, Elias set down his hammer and looked at her, his face open, unguarded. This place could be a home again, he said, voice low, with Lily, if you'd have it. Clara's breath caught, her heart a tangle of fear and want. She thought of the bruise that had faded, the whispers that no longer cut as deep. You sure? She asked, her voice trembling. Elias took her hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles. I've never been surer, he said. Marry me, Clara. Let's build this together. She nodded, tears pricking her eyes, not from sorrow but from the weight of a future she could finally see. They sat on the blanket, Lily between them, the prairie stretching wide and free. Clara leaned into Elias, his arm around her, and felt the roots of a new life sinking deep. Strong as the fence they'd mended, August's golden light bathed Redstone, the air thick with the scent of ripe hay and the hum of late summer. Clara, it stood before the small church, her dress simple but new, sewn from soft blue calico Elias had slipped into her hands weeks ago. Lily, clutching a fistful of wildflowers, toddled at her side, her laughter mingling with the soft chatter of gathered townsfolk. The whispers that once stung had dulled, softened by time and the quiet strength of Clara and Elias's bond. Today was their wedding, not grand, but true. Inside, the church was plain, its pews worn, sunlight streaming through a single stained glass window, casting colors across the floor. Elias waited at the altar, his hazel eyes steady, his Sunday suit pressed but slightly frayed at the cuffs of man who'd chosen her, scars and all. Clara walked toward him, her steps slow, deliberate, Lily's hand in hers. No music played, but the silence felt sacred, filled with the weight of their shared journey. The preacher's words were brief, his voice a low hum, but Clara barely heard them. She felt Elias's hand, warm and calloused, as he slipped a plain band onto her finger, his touch a vow deeper than words. I see you, Clara, he murmured, so only she could hear. Always will. Her throat tightened and she squeezed his hand, her own promise unspoken but whole. After, they stepped into the churchyard, where a few townsfolk lingered, offering nods instead of whispers. Mrs. Cutler, the landlady, pressed a small basket of apples into Clara's hands, her eyes softer than before. No grand feast followed, just a quiet gathering at the ranch now, their home where they shared bread and preserves under the cottonwoods. Lily chasing fireflies as dusk fell, as night settled. Clara and Elias sat on the porch, the prairie stretching, dark and endless before them. Her head rested on his shoulder, the quilt from her attic days draped over them. You reminded me who I already was, she whispered, her voice steady, rooted. Elias kissed her temple, his silence a reply, warm and sure. The stars above burned bright, and Clara felt peace, not as a fleeting guest, but as a home she'd built, stitch by stitch, beside the man who saw her true.